You're cleared for weekend pass, Santos. Those were the words I've been waiting to hear for 8 weeks. I sat in Dr. Kim's office at Walter Reed Medical Center, trying not to let my excitement show too much on my face. After 2 months of intensive PTSD therapy, physical rehabilitation for the shrapnel wound in my left leg, and more sleepless nights than I could count, I was finally going home. My name is Maria Santos, and I'm 26 years old. 3 months ago, I was a combat medic stationed in Eastern Europe, doing what I'd trained for since I enlisted at 18. Then an IED changed everything. The explosion that killed Corporal Jenkins and Private Martinez left me with more than just physical scars. Every night, I still hear the sound of that blast, still smell the smoke and blood, still see their faces in the split second before everything went white. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "How are you feeling about the visit?" Dr. Kim asked, her voice carrying that professional warmth I'd grown to appreciate over our sessions. She was one of the few people at Walter Reed who understood that healing from combat trauma wasn't just about following protocols and taking medications. "Nervous," I admitted, flexing my fingers around the small gift bag I'd been clutching throughout our session. Inside was a ceramic coffee mug I'd bought at the base exchange that morning. It had "World's Best Mom" painted in bright yellow letters across the front. "How are you feeling about the visit?" Dr. Kim asked, her voice carrying that professional warmth I'd grown to appreciate over our sessions. She was one of the few people at Walter Reed who understood that healing from combat trauma wasn't just about following protocols and taking medications. "Nervous," I admitted, flexing my fingers around the small gift bag I'd been clutching throughout our session. Inside was a ceramic coffee mug I'd bought at the base exchange that morning. It had "World's Best Mom" painted in bright yellow letters across the front. "How are you feeling about the visit?" Dr. Kim asked, her voice carrying that professional warmth I'd grown to appreciate over our sessions. She was one of the few people at Walter Reed who understood that healing from combat trauma wasn't just about following protocols and taking medications. "Nervous," I admitted, flexing my fingers around the small gift bag I'd been clutching throughout our session. Inside was a ceramic coffee mug I'd bought at the base exchange that morning. It had "World's Best Mom" painted in bright yellow letters across the front. That was 14 months ago. 14 months since I'd hugged my mother, Carmen, goodbye at the San Antonio airport, promising to call every week and come home as soon as I could. 14 months since I handed over the deed to the house I'd bought for them, watching my mother's eyes fill with tears as she realized what I'd done. The house had been my way of showing them I'd made it. A 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a decent neighborhood on San Antonio's south side, purchased with my military benefits and every penny I'd saved since enlisting. It wasn't much by some standards, but for a family that had spent years moving between cramped apartments and borrowed couches, it represented everything I joined the military to achieve. "You know," I told Carmen that day, pressing the keys into her palm, "this means you don't have to worry anymore about rent, about moving, about any of it. It's yours." My mother had cried then, really cried, pulling me into a hug that felt like forgiveness for all the years of struggle. My younger brother Roberto had stood in the background nodding his approval with something that almost looked like pride. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd truly given my family something they couldn't get anywhere else. "The important thing," Dr. Kim continued, pulling me back to the present, "is to manage your expectations. Your family has been dealing with their own stress during your deployment and recovery. People sometimes react differently than we hope when we're going through trauma." I nodded, though privately I couldn't imagine anything dampening my excitement. My phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant First Class David Thompson, my former squad leader and the closest thing I had to a brother in the military. Everyone called him Tank, a nickname he'd earned through a combination of his stocky build and his tendency to push through any obstacle in his path. "Heard you got weekend pass. Want company on the trip home?" Tank had been in the same convoy when the IED hit. He'd pulled me out of the wreckage while I was still unconscious, and he'd been checking on me regularly ever since. The offer was tempting. Tank's presence always made me feel safer, more grounded, but this was something I needed to do alone. "Thanks, but I've got this. Family time, you know?" "Roger that. Call if you need anything." And I mean anything. That was Tank, loyal to the bone, protective of his soldiers even when they weren't under his command anymore. The military had given me a lot of things over the years, but the relationships I'd built with people like Tank and Dr. Kim felt more valuable than any paycheck or benefit package. An hour later, I was at Reagan National Airport, my military duffel bag slung over my shoulder and the gift bag clutched in my good hand. The airport was crowded with the usual mix of business travelers and families, but every unexpected sound, rolling luggage, overhead announcements, the hiss of hydraulic doors, made my shoulders tense. When a child's balloon popped near the security checkpoint,
I hit the floor so fast that two TSA agents immediately moved toward me. "I'm fine," I said quickly, pushing myself back to my feet and showing my military ID. "I'm cleared to fly."
The agents exchanged glances but waved me through. I could feel other passengers staring as I collected my belongings and moved toward my gate, their mixture of curiosity and pity burning against my back. This was the part of coming home that nobody prepared you for, the way your trauma became visible to strangers, marking you as damaged goods even when you were fighting every day to heal. But as the plane lifted off and I watched the Potomac River shrink below us, none of that mattered. I was going home to the people who knew me before the war, before the explosion, before everything changed. I was going home to the house I'd bought as proof that all my sacrifice had been worth something. The flight to San Antonio was smooth, giving me time to think about how much had changed since I'd last been home. Carmen had sounded different in our phone calls over the past few months. Distracted, sometimes evasive when I asked about the house or how she was spending her time. I had attributed it to worry about my recovery, the natural stress of having a daughter in combat and then in military medical care. But now that I was actually going home, I found myself looking forward to those easy conversations we used to have, the comfortable silences that came from people who truly knew each other. Roberto had been even more distant in our conversations, often cutting calls short or letting them go to voicemail entirely. At 24, he'd never quite found his direction in life, bouncing between community college classes and part-time jobs without ever committing to anything long-term. But I'd always figured he just needed time to figure things out. Having a stable home base would help, I'd told myself. Having one less thing to worry about would give him space to focus on his future. As we began our descent into San Antonio, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken before leaving for deployment. There was Carmen in the kitchen of the new house, beaming as she showed off the updated appliances. Roberto sprawled across the living room couch, finally looking relaxed for the first time in years. The three of us standing in front of the house with the for sale sign replaced it by a small garden that Carmen had planted in celebration. Those photos represented everything I'd hoped to achieve when I enlisted: financial stability for my family, a sense of security that had eluded us throughout my childhood, and proof that hard work and sacrifice could actually change your circumstances. The house wasn't just a building, it was a promise that we'd finally made it past the uncertainty and struggle that had defined our lives for so long. The plane touched down just after 2 p.m., and I caught the first cab I could find outside baggage claim. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, noticed my military uniform and thanked me for my service. We talked briefly about his son who was considering joining the Navy, and I found myself giving him the same advice I'd given to other military families over the years. The service would challenge your child in ways you couldn't imagine, but it would also give them opportunities and discipline that could change their entire life trajectory. As we drove through familiar neighborhoods toward my family's house, I felt that mixture of anticipation and nervousness that comes with returning to a place that holds so many memories. San Antonio looked the same, the blend of old and new architecture, the mix of cultures and languages that had shaped my childhood, the sense of community that had made leaving for the military both necessary and heartbreaking. "You been away long?" the driver asked as we turned into the subdivision where my family's house was located. 14 months, I said, checking the address on my phone even though I could navigate to the house in my sleep. Deployment and then medical leave. "Well, I bet your family's going to be real happy to see you." I smiled, imagining Carmen's face when I knocked on the door, the way she'd probably cry and insist on cooking my favorite meal, even though I told her I was coming home unannounced. Roberto would probably give me grief about surprising them, but I knew he'd be happy to. Maybe we'd sit on the back porch like we used to, talking about everything and nothing, while the sun set over the neighborhood I'd worked so hard to give them. "Yeah," I told the driver, my hand closing around the gift bag with the coffee mug. "Yeah, I think they will be." The cab dropped me off at 1247 Elmwood Drive, and immediately something felt wrong. The yard that Carmen had maintained so carefully was overgrown, weeds choking out the small flower garden she had planted when we first moved in. The mailbox that had once displayed our family name in neat black letters was gone entirely, replaced by a generic silver box with different numbers.
I stood on the sidewalk with my duffel bag, staring at what should have been my family's house. The shutters were painted a different color, navy blue instead of the forest green that Carmen had chosen. A late-model Honda sat in the driveway, not the aging Toyota that Roberto had been driving when I left for deployment. Maybe they'd made some changes, I told myself. Maybe Carmen had decided to update the exterior, get a new car with some of the money they'd saved on rent. But the knot in my stomach suggested something more fundamental was wrong.
I walked up the familiar driveway, noting how the small crack near the garage door had been repaired, how the front steps had been restained. Someone had clearly been taking care of the place, but the attention to detail felt different somehow, more professional, less personal. When I rang the doorbell, a woman I'd never seen before answered. She was maybe 40, with short brown hair and a confused expression that deepened when she saw my military uniform and duffel bag. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping the screen door between us. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I think I might have the wrong address. I'm looking for the Santos family. Carmen and Roberto Santos?" The woman's expression softened with what looked like sympathy. "Oh, honey, the Santos family moved out months ago. We bought this house back in February." February. That was 3 months ago, while I was still in the intensive care unit at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, fighting infections from the shrapnel wounds and struggling with the psychological aftermath of losing Jenkins and Martinez. "That's not possible," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. "This is my family's house. I bought it for them before my deployment." The woman studied my face, and I could see the moment she realized what was happening. "You're military. Combat medic, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos. This was my family's house." She opened the screen door then, stepping out onto the porch with the careful movements of someone who just realized they were standing in the middle of a personal catastrophe. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "The real estate agent told us the previous owners had moved to Florida for family reasons. We had no idea about your situation." Florida? Carmen had never mentioned Florida. In our phone calls over the past few months, she'd talked about the house, about the neighborhood, about how grateful she was for the stability I'd given them. She never mentioned selling it. She'd never mentioned leaving. "Did they leave a forwarding address?" I asked, though I already knew they hadn't, even as I was pulling out my phone with shaking hands. "I don't think so, but you could check with the real estate company, Morrison Properties on Oak Street." I dialed Carmen's number, watching the woman retreat tactfully into her house while I waited for my mother to answer. When her voice came through the phone, it carried that familiar note of irritation she'd always used when she was busy with something more important. "Maria? What's wrong? I thought you were still at that hospital." "Mom?" I said, my voice cracking on the word. "I'm standing in front of our house and there are strangers living in it. What happened?" There was a pause, long enough for me to hear traffic in the background and what sounded like casino slot machines. "Oh, that," Carmen said finally, as if I had asked about a minor household repair. "We had to sell. The market was good and we got an offer we couldn't refuse." "You sold the house? When? Why didn't you tell me?" "We needed the money, mija. And you were in the hospital, dealing with your own problems. We didn't want to add to your stress." The casual dismissal in her voice hit me like a physical blow. "Add to my stress? Mom, I bought that house for you, with my military benefits and my savings. Where am I supposed to go now?" "You're 26 years old, Maria. You're in the military. You'll figure something out." I pressed my free hand against my forehead, trying to process what she was telling me. "Where are you living now?" "Roberto and I got a nice place in Tampa. Your Annalena sold us a good deal on a condo. The weather's better for my arthritis." "Tampa?" While I was learning to walk again without a limp, while I was fighting through nightmares and therapy sessions, while I was trying to rebuild my sense of self after watching 2 of my soldiers die, my family had sold the house I'd bought them and moved across the country without telling me? What about my things? My room? We packed up what we could. Some of it might still be in storage, but we couldn't pay for that indefinitely. You understand? No, I said, my voice rising despite my training in emotional regulation. I don't understand. I don't understand how you could sell my house and move to Florida without telling me. I don't understand how you could pack up my life like I was already dead. Don't be so dramatic, Maria. We did what we had to do. The house was in our name anyway. The house was in their name because I put it there, because I wanted them to have security, to never worry about losing their home again, because I'd trusted them to treat it like the gift of love it was supposed to be. I'm coming to Florida. We need to talk about this in person. That's not a good idea right now. Roberto and I are still settling in, and you need to focus on getting better. We'll figure out a time to visit once you're back on your feet. Back on my feet. As if I wasn't standing in front of the house I'd bought for them, having traveled across the country on my first weekend pass from military medical care, only to discover that my entire life had been erased without consultation or warning.
Mom, please, I need to understand what happened. I have to go, mija. Roberto and I have appointments. You're smart. You'll figure something out. The line went dead. I stared at my phone screen, seeing my reflection in the black surface. Pale, shocked, wearing the uniform of a country I'd served faithfully, while my own family had been systematically erasing my existence from their lives. I tried calling Roberto, but it went straight to voicemail. His recorded message, cheerful and casual, felt like a cruel joke. "Hey, you've reached Roberto Santos. Leave a message and I'll get back to you when I can." But I knew he wouldn't get back to me. Neither of them would. The woman who'd bought my house appeared at her front door again, carrying a glass of water and wearing the expression of someone who'd witnessed a tragedy from a safe distance. "Are you okay, honey? Do you need me to call someone?" I took the water gratefully, my hands still shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. "Thank you. I need a minute to figure out what to do next." She nodded sympathetically. "For what it's worth, this is a lovely house. We've been very happy here. Your family took good care of it." My family. The people who'd raised me, who I'd supported financially for years, who I'd trusted with the most important investment of my life. The people who'd apparently decided that my near-death experience in combat was a convenient time to cash out and start over without me. I sat down on the curb with my duffel bag, watching neighbors peer through their windows at the military woman having a breakdown in front of the house that used to be hers. The humiliation burned through me like acid, but it was nothing compared to the deeper pain of realizing that everything I'd believed about my family's love and loyalty had been a lie. The PTSD symptoms that I'd managed to keep under control during the flight began to surface with a vengeance. The sound of a car door slamming made me flinch. The sight of a jogger running past triggered memories of soldiers running for cover. My breathing became shallow and rapid as the familiar signs of a panic attack began to build. But this time, the trigger wasn't combat trauma. This time, it was the realization that the people I'd trusted most in the world had betrayed that trust in the most complete way possible. They'd sold the house I'd bought for them, moved across the country, and apparently expected me to just figure something out, like their betrayal was a minor inconvenience rather than the destruction of everything I'd worked to build. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, looking for someone, anyone, who might be able to help me make sense of what had just happened. But most of my close relationships were military, people stationed at bases around the world who couldn't exactly drop everything to help me navigate a family crisis in San Antonio. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the street where I had imagined having so many future conversations with Carmen and Roberto. The neighborhood looked peaceful, settled, like the kind of place where families built lives together instead of abandoning each other when things got difficult.
As I sat there with my military duffel bag and my gift for a mother who just discarded me like unwanted baggage, I began to understand that my recovery from combat trauma was about to become exponentially more complicated. It's one thing to process the betrayal of enemies who try to kill you. It's another entirely different thing to process the betrayal of the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. The woman from the house appeared again, this time carrying a jacket and a business card. "It's going to get cold soon," she said gently, "and I found the contact information for the real estate agent who handled the sale. Maybe she can tell you more about where your family went." I took both offerings gratefully, though I suspected that Morrison Properties wouldn't have any information that would explain why my family had decided to erase me from their lives while I was fighting for my life in a military hospital. I must have been sitting on that curb for over an hour when I heard the voice that would change everything. "Excuse me, mija, are you all right?" I looked up to see an elderly woman standing at the edge of the driveway, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and her dark eyes filled with concern. She was maybe 75, with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of decades of hard work, wearing a simple floral dress and carrying a plate covered with aluminum foil. "I'm fine," I said automatically, though we both knew it wasn't true. "Just figuring some things out. You're Maria, aren't you? Carmen's daughter." The sound of my mother's name made my stomach clench, but I nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." "Isabella Rodriguez," she said, settling down on the curb beside me with surprising agility for her age. "I live right there," she pointed, to a small but well-maintained house directly across the street. "I've been watching over this place since your family, well, since they left." Watching over this place, as if it still belonged to us somehow, as if it hadn't been sold to strangers while I was unconscious in a hospital bed thousands of miles away. "Mrs. Rodriguez, did you know they were planning to sell?"
Isabella's expression darkened, and she was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Mija, I think you and I need to have a serious conversation. But first, let me ask you something. When did you last talk to your mother?" "About 3 weeks ago. She called to check on my recovery, asked about my physical therapy. She seemed normal. And she didn't mention anything about Tampa, about a new car, about the man who'd been coming around asking about the house?" I felt my blood turn cold. "What man?" Isabella sighed heavily, the sound carrying years of disappointment and worry. "Come inside, mija. Let me make you some coffee and show you what I've been keeping track of. You need to know what really happened here." Her house was exactly what I had expected from a woman of her generation. Clean, comfortable, filled with family photos and the smell of something delicious cooking on the stove. She led me to a kitchen table covered with a cheerful yellow tablecloth and gestured for me to sit while she busied herself with an ancient coffee maker. "First things first," she said, setting a steaming mug in front of me. "Your family didn't just sell that house, mija. They've been planning it for months, and they've been living like people who suddenly came into a lot of money." She disappeared into what looked like a home office and returned with a manila folder thick with photographs and handwritten notes. "I hope you don't mind, but when I saw how they were acting, I started keeping track. My husband served in Korea, and he always told me that families needed to look out for military families when they're deployed." Isabella opened the folder and spread out a series of photographs taken with what looked like a telephoto lens from her front window. They showed Carmen getting out of a brand new silver Lexus, not the aging Toyota I remembered, Roberto loading expensive-looking boxes into the trunk of the same car, a man in a suit standing on the front porch shaking hands with Carmen while Roberto stood in the background. "When did you take these?" "The car showed up in January, right after the new year. The real estate agent started coming around in February. They moved out the first week of March, but they told everyone they were just going on vacation." March. I'd still been in the hospital in Germany then, dealing with complications from my surgeries and struggling with the worst of my PTSD symptoms. I'd called Carmen several times that month, and she'd answered every call from what she had told me was the house, never mentioning that she was actually calling from a hotel room or temporary apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez, what exactly did you see? Isabella turned to a new section of her folder, pulling out what looked like a careful log of dates and observations. Carmen started acting different right after they got word about your injury. I saw her on the phone a lot, talking about money and insurance. Then she started having meetings with people I'd never seen before. She handed me a photograph that made my stomach drop. It showed Carmen standing in the driveway next to a man in an expensive suit, both of them smiling as they looked at what appeared to be paperwork. The real estate agent? That's what I figured. But here's the thing, mija. Normal people don't sell their houses and move across the country while their daughter is fighting for her life in a military hospital. Normal people wait. Normal people ask if their injured child needs a place to recover. The truth of what Isabella was saying hit me like another IED blast. Carmen hadn't sold the house because some emergency or sudden opportunity. She'd sold it because she'd seen my injury as a chance to cash out while I was too incapacitated to stop her. There's more, Isabella continued gently. Your mother started talking to the neighbors about how expensive your medical care was, how much stress your injury was causing the family. But then she and Roberto started showing up with new clothes, talking about trips to the casino, going out to expensive restaurants. She showed me another series of photographs, Carmen and Roberto dressed in clothes I'd never seen before, getting out of the Lexus at what looked like an upscale shopping center. Carmen carrying bags from stores that I knew she had never been able to afford before. They were spending money like they'd won the lottery, but telling everyone they were struggling because of your medical bills. The betrayal was deeper than I had initially realized. Carmen hadn't just sold the house I'd bought for them. She'd used my combat injury as cover, while she systematically liquidated the security I'd tried to provide, then moved across the country to enjoy the proceeds while I was too injured to stop her. Mrs. Rodriguez, why didn't you try to contact me? Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Mija, I tried. I called the number your mother had given me for emergencies, but it was disconnected. I even tried reaching out to the military, but they said they couldn't give out information about patients to non-family members. She had tried to protect me, this woman I'd never met, while my own family had been systematically betraying my trust. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastating. I have more information, Isabella said carefully, about where they went, about what they did with the money. But first, I need to ask you something. Do you have anywhere to go? Anyone who can help you?
I thought about Tank, about Dr. Kim, about the military support networks I'd never had to use before. Maybe. I'm not sure. Because if you don't, you're welcome to stay here while you figure things out. I have a spare room, and frankly, I could use the company. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that I felt tears starting to build behind my eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez, you don't even know me. I know you're Carmen's daughter, and I know you bought that house for your family before you went to serve your country. I know you came home expecting to find the people you love, and instead found strangers living in your house. She reached across the table and patted my hand with her weathered fingers. I know you deserve better than what happened to you today. For the first time since I'd arrived in San Antonio, I felt like someone was actually seeing me, not as a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed, but as a person who'd been wronged and deserved support. There's something else, Isabella said, pulling out one final photograph. This was taken the day before they moved out. The image showed Carmen and Roberto standing in front of the house with a man I didn't recognize, all three of them smiling broadly while Carmen held what looked like a check. But it was the expression on my mother's face that broke my heart. Pure satisfaction, like someone who just completed a successful business transaction. Who's the man? I think he's your mother's brother-in-law, Elena's husband. He drove down from Houston to help them move. Elena, Carmen's sister, who I'd always thought was more stable, more responsible than my mother. If Elena was involved in this, it meant the betrayal ran through multiple generations of my family. Mrs. Rodriguez, I said slowly, I think I need to make some phone calls. To people who might be able to help me figure out what to do next. Of course, mija. Use the phone in the living room. Take as much time as you need. I'll be in the kitchen making dinner. You look like you haven't eaten in hours. As I walked toward her living room, I caught sight of a framed photograph on the mantel. A young man in a military uniform, probably from the Korean War era, standing next to a woman who looked like a younger version of Isabella. That's my husband, Miguel. He always said that when military families are in trouble, civilians have a duty to help however they can. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Tank's number, knowing that whatever came next, I was going to need the kind of support that only comes from people who understand loyalty, duty, and the true meaning of family. But as I prepared to make the call that would change everything, I found myself looking back at Isabella, this woman who'd taken in a stranger, who'd documented my family's betrayal, who'd offered shelter and kindness without expecting anything in return. Maybe, I thought, family wasn't just about blood relations. Maybe it was about finding people who would stand by you when the people who were supposed to love you decided to walk away. Tank answered on the first ring. Santos, talk to me. Tank, I need help. My family sold the house. The one I bought them before deployment. They're gone. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear his chair scraping against the floor. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted into tactical mode. Where are you right now? San Antonio, sitting in a neighbor's house because I have nowhere else to go. Jesus Christ, Santos, they sold your house while you were in medical? I told him everything. The strangers in my house, Carmen's dismissive phone call, Roberto's silence. Tank listened without interrupting, but I could feel his anger building through the phone. Here's what's going to happen, he said finally. You're going to give me your current address, and then you're going to sit tight while I make some calls. This isn't just family drama, Santos. If they used your VA benefits to facilitate that sale, they committed federal crimes. Federal crimes? I hadn't even considered that angle. In my shock, I'd been thinking of this as personal betrayal rather than potential legal issues. Tank, I don't want to cause trouble for them if... Stop right there, Santos. These people stole from you while you were unconscious in a hospital bed. They committed fraud using your military service as cover. This isn't about causing trouble. This is about protecting yourself and every other service member who might face similar exploitation. After giving him Isabella's information, Tank continued, I'm calling Captain Walsh at the Military Housing Office first thing tomorrow. She specializes in cases like this, and she's going to want to talk to you immediately. Tank, what if this makes everything worse? Santos, listen carefully. Family doesn't steal from you when you're down. Family doesn't abandon you when you need them most. Family doesn't use your service as an opportunity to commit fraud. What these people did is exactly why we have institutional protections for service members. The military takes care of its own, Santos. Let us do what we're supposed to do. Captain Walsh called 3 days later with news that changed everything. Staff Sergeant Santos, I need you to sit down for this conversation. Her tone made me grip Isabella's couch armrest. Yes, ma'am.
My investigators have uncovered a pattern of financial abuse going back nearly 2 years. Your mother has been systematically draining your military accounts, forging your signature, and using your military status to obtain credit. 2 years. The theft had started before my deployment, while I was still stateside and regularly sending money home. How much money, ma'am? Preliminary estimates suggest approximately $68,000 in fraudulent transactions, not including the house sale. Your mother has been treating your military benefits like her personal bank account. $68,000? More than most people made in a year, stolen by the woman who'd raised me to believe family came first. There's more. Your brother Roberto has been listed as employed by a consulting company that doesn't exist. He's been using fake employment to claim dependent benefits on your military account. Roberto. My underachieving brother, who I'd always felt sorry for, had been actively stealing from me while I risked my life overseas. How is this possible? Your mother had power of attorney for emergencies while you were deployed. She's been systematically abusing that access. The house sale was the culmination, not the beginning. Financial records show she spent your accounts to finance a gambling addiction. Gambling addiction? The casino sounds I'd heard during our phone call suddenly made sense. We've also discovered concerning communications with your Aunt Elena. Phone records suggest she may have been providing advice on accessing your military benefits. Elena? If she was involved, the betrayal ran through multiple generations. What happens now? Federal investigators are preparing charges for identity theft, mail fraud, and violation of laws protecting military service members. Your mother and brother are looking at significant prison time. After the call, I found Isabella in her garden. "Bad news?" she asked. "Worse than I thought. $68,000 over 2 years. Isabella whistled softly. "That's not family in trouble, Mija. That's family that sees you as a resource to be exploited." Lieutenant Colonel Webb's call came at 0630. Staff Sergeant Santos, report to Lackland Air Force Base at 0900. Bring your dress uniform. Dress uniform meant this had escalated to the highest levels. In his office 2 hours later, Lieutenant Colonel Webb was direct. "Santos, this case has implications beyond your personal situation. We're dealing with a pattern affecting hundreds of service members." He slid a photograph across his desk showing Carmen meeting with a man in civilian clothes. "Your family's methods were sophisticated. They had help from someone with extensive military experience. Master Sergeant William Hayes, retired, cashiered out 3 years ago for financial irregularities. He's been using his knowledge of military benefits to help civilian family members defraud active duty service members." A scheme. Carmen hadn't been a desperate mother. She'd been part of organized crime targeting military families. Current estimates suggest at least 40 cases over 3 years, total damage exceeding $2 million. $2 million. My case wasn't isolated. It was part of massive criminal enterprise. "Santos, the federal prosecutor needs your cooperation to build a case against Hayes. I'm asking you to be the face of this investigation, to testify publicly and help ensure Hayes faces justice." Going public meant exposing my family's betrayal to media scrutiny, turning personal trauma into a cautionary tale. What about my family? They'll face federal charges regardless, but cooperation could help build a stronger case and potentially reduce their sentences if they testify against Hayes. He introduced James Mitchell, a veterans' rights attorney willing to take my case pro bono. "We're going to recover every penny they stole, plus damages," Mitchell assured me, "and use your case to strengthen legal protections for deployed service members. If I testify publicly, what happens to my military career?" "Nothing negative. Your willingness to speak out will be viewed favorably. The military needs advocates who understand these issues from personal experience." That evening, I called Tank. "This is bigger than just you now. If your family was part of a scheme targeting military families, stopping that scheme is a military mission." "I'm scared everyone will know how stupid I was." "Santos, you weren't stupid. You were loyal, you were generous, you were everything a good soldier should be. The fact that your family exploited those qualities doesn't make you weak, it makes them criminals." The next morning, I called Lieutenant Colonel Webb with my decision to testify. Carmen's counterattack came exactly 1 week after I agreed to testify. James Mitchell called me at Isabella's house, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Santos, they're going after your mental health. Your family's lawyer is claiming you're incompetent due to PTSD and unable to make rational decisions about family finances." I felt my chest tighten. This was my deepest fear, that my trauma would be used to discredit me, that the very injuries I'd sustained serving my country would become weapons against me. "What does that mean
legally. It means we need Dr. Kim to provide a comprehensive psychological evaluation proving your competency. And it means your family is willing to destroy your reputation to save themselves. That afternoon, Carmen called me directly for the first time since that devastating conversation outside my sold house. Her voice carried a false sweetness that made my skin crawl.
Mija, I heard you're having some problems with the military lawyers. Maybe we should talk. Work this out as a family. Carmen, there's nothing to work out. You stole from me while I was unconscious in the hospital. That's not how it happened, Maria. You're confused because of your injuries. You told me to handle the finances while you were sick. Don't you remember? The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I questioned my own memory. Then I remembered Captain Walsh's evidence, the forged documents, the timeline that proved Carmen had been planning this theft for months. I remember everything perfectly. I remember trusting you with power of attorney for emergencies, not for you to rob me blind. Maria, honey, you're not thinking clearly. The explosion hurts your brain. Maybe you should focus on getting better instead of trying to hurt your own family. The explosion hurt your brain. She was trying to use my traumatic brain injury against me, suggesting that my memories and judgment were compromised by combat trauma. I'm hanging up now, Carmen. Don't call me again. Maria, wait. I know you're angry, but Elena and I think you need professional help. We're worried about you. Elena. Of course my aunt was involved in this new strategy. They were presenting themselves as concerned family members worried about my mental health while simultaneously trying to use my PTSD diagnosis to discredit my testimony. I hung up and immediately called Dr. Kim at Walter Reed. Staff Sergeant Santos, I've been expecting your call. Captain Walsh briefed me about your family's legal strategy. I want you to know that using someone's PTSD diagnosis to question their competency is not only morally reprehensible, it's also legally problematic. Dr. Kim, what if they're right? What if my judgment is compromised? Maria, listen to me carefully. PTSD affects emotional regulation and stress responses. It does not affect your ability to understand that stealing $68,000 is wrong. It doesn't affect your memory of events that happened before your trauma. And it certainly doesn't affect your right to seek justice when you've been victimized. Her voice carried the professional authority that had helped me through my worst therapy sessions. I'm going to provide a comprehensive evaluation that documents your full mental competency. Your family is about to learn that attacking a veteran's mental health in federal court is a very dangerous strategy. 3 days later, Elena showed up at Isabella's house unannounced. I watched from the kitchen window as she knocked on the front door carrying flowers and wearing the expression of someone on a mission of mercy. Isabella answered the door with the polite firmness of someone who'd raised 3 children and wasn't easily manipulated. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Elena Santos, Maria's aunt. I'm here to check on my niece. She's not available for visitors right now. I'm family. I'm concerned about her mental state. The military has been filling her head with lies about her mother. From the kitchen, I could see Elena trying to peer around Isabella into the house. Her concern was performative, designed to establish her as the reasonable family member worried about my well-being. Ma'am, Maria is doing fine. She's surrounded by people who care about her and want what's best for her. People who are using her trauma to turn her against her own family. Elena shot back, her mask slipping slightly. She needs to be with people who love her, not strangers who are exploiting her situation. Isabella's voice remained level. I think you should leave now. I'm not leaving until I see Maria. She's being manipulated by people who don't understand her condition. That's when I stepped onto the porch. Elena's face immediately shifted into an expression of exaggerated relief and concern. Maria, mija, thank God. I've been so worried about you. Your mother told me what the military lawyers are making you say about the house. Nobody is making me say anything, Elena. I'm telling the truth about what Carmen and Roberto did to me. Honey, you're not thinking clearly. The brain injury from the explosion. Stop. My voice carried the command authority I'd learned in combat. Stop trying to use my service-connected injuries to gaslight me. I know exactly what happened, and I have documentation to prove it. Elena's face hardened. Maria, you're destroying your own family over money. Is that really what you want? I didn't destroy this family, Elena.
Carmen and Roberto destroyed it when they decided to steal from me while I was fighting for my life. And you destroyed it when you helped them plan it. Her face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Phone records, Elena. The FBI has recordings of you giving Carmen advice about accessing military benefits. You're not here because you're worried about me. You're here because you're worried about yourself. She left without another word, but not before I saw something calculating in her expression that confirmed she was gathering information for Carmen's legal team. That evening, James Mitchell called with an update on Dr. Kim's evaluation. Your psychiatrist's report is devastating to their case, he said with satisfaction. She documented that you show no signs of cognitive impairment, that your memory of pre-trauma events is completely intact, and that your decision-making capacity is unaffected by your PTSD diagnosis. What does that mean for their strategy? It means they just handed us a defamation case, claiming that a combat veteran is mentally incompetent due to service-connected injuries without medical evidence opens them up to additional federal charges.
James, why are they doing this? Why can't they just admit what they did and try to make it right? Because admitting what they did means facing 20 years in federal prison. They're desperate, Santos, and desperate people do desperate things. But they've made a crucial mistake. They've attacked your service and your sacrifice. That's something federal prosecutors and military advocates take very personally.
The evidence phase began 2 weeks later with a federal courthouse that felt like a battleground. Tank had driven down from Fort Hood to provide moral support, and Isabella had insisted on attending despite having no legal obligation to be there. You don't face something like this alone, she'd said firmly when I suggested she stay home. Miguel taught me that when someone attacks a veteran, they attack all of us. James Mitchell had assembled what he called an overwhelming mountain of evidence. Financial records showing the systematic theft, forged documents with Carmen's handwriting analyzed by federal experts, recordings of phone calls where Elena provided specific advice about accessing military accounts. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source, Master Sergeant Hayes's own records. Hayes kept meticulous documentation of his clients, Captain Walsh explained during a pre-testimony briefing. He treated military family fraud like a business, complete with files on each family he helped and detailed instructions for maximizing theft from deployed service members. She showed me a folder labeled Santos Family Deployment Opportunity. Inside were copies of my military records, deployment orders, and medical status reports that Hayes had somehow obtained illegally. This proves premeditation. Your mother didn't stumble into fraud. She was recruited by a professional criminal who specialized in exploiting military families. The file contained handwritten notes in Carmen's handwriting. Maria unconscious, Germany hospital, limited communication window. VA benefits transfer process. Elena confirms legal authority. House sale timing before medical discharge. Seeing my near-death experience reduced to criminal opportunities in my own mother's handwriting was devastating. But it was also clarifying. This wasn't a desperate mother making poor decisions under stress. This was calculated predation. Tank reviewed the evidence with the tactical precision he'd brought to analyzing enemy positions. Santos, this is actually good for you. It proves your family knew exactly what they were doing and planned it deliberately. No jury is going to have sympathy for this level of premeditation. The prosecution strategy became clear during jury selection. They weren't just prosecuting financial crimes. They were prosecuting an attack on military families and the trust that holds military communities together. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is more than money. It's about whether we allow criminals to target our service members when they're most vulnerable, using their family relationships as weapons against them. Carmen and Roberto sat at the defense table, looking smaller than I remembered. Carmen wore a conservative dress and had styled her hair to look maternal and non-threatening.
Roberto kept his eyes down, refusing to look in my direction. Elena sat in the gallery behind them, her presence a reminder that the betrayal extended beyond my immediate family. When I took the stand, James Mitchell had prepared me for the emotional impact of testifying against my own family, but nothing had prepared me for the moment when I had to look directly at Carmen and describe how her theft had affected my recovery. The money wasn't just money. It was my security. It was my proof that all the sacrifice and service had been worth something. When I discovered what she'd done, it didn't just take away my financial stability, it took away my ability to trust that my service had meaning. Carmen's lawyer tried to cross-examine me about my PTSD diagnosis, but Dr. Kim's evaluation had made that strategy backfire spectacularly. Staff Sergeant Santos, isn't it true that your combat trauma has affected your memory? My trauma affects my emotional regulation and stress responses. It doesn't affect my ability to read bank statements or recognize forged documents. But you've admitted to having trust issues since your injury. Yes, I have trust issues. And this case perfectly illustrates why those trust issues are rational and adaptive. The courtroom was silent as the implications of that statement settled. My PTSD symptoms weren't evidence of incompetence. They were evidence of hard-learned wisdom about betrayal and exploitation. Isabella testified about witnessing Carmen's behavior during my deployment, her documentation proving the timeline of luxury purchases and secretive meetings. Her testimony carried the moral authority of someone who'd spent decades supporting military families without expecting anything in return. Tank's testimony focused on the impact of family financial abuse on military morale and readiness. When service members can't trust their families to honor their sacrifice, it affects their ability to focus on their mission. It affects their willingness to deploy, their performance in combat, and their mental health during recovery. What the Santos family did to Staff Sergeant Santos is an attack on military effectiveness. The defense's strategy completely collapsed when Roberto broke under cross-examination and admitted to everything. His attempt to claim he'd been manipulated by Carmen fell apart when prosecutors showed evidence of his active participation in forging documents and accessing my accounts.
I knew it was wrong, he finally admitted, tears streaming down his face. But Carmen said Maria would never find out, and we needed the money. Carmen's reaction to her son's confession was telling. Instead of remorse, her face showed pure rage. Not at herself for putting him in that position, but at him for telling the truth. As the evidence phase concluded, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the IED attack. Complete vindication. Not just legal vindication, but moral vindication. The people who'd raised me to believe in family loyalty had proven themselves unworthy of that loyalty, while strangers had shown me what real family looked like. The guilty verdicts came back after 3 hours of jury deliberation. Carmen, guilty, on all counts. Roberto, guilty, on all counts. Elena, guilty of conspiracy and accessory charges. Master Sergeant Hayes, guilty of running a criminal enterprise targeting military families. I sat between Tank and Isabella as the verdicts were read, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but the cost was the permanent destruction of my biological family. Carmen's sentencing hearing 2 weeks later provided the final clarity I needed about who these people really were. "Your Honor," she said, when given the opportunity to address the court, "I'm the real victim here. My daughter has been brainwashed by military lawyers who turned her against her own family. Everything I did was to help her, and this is how she repays me." Even facing federal prison, Carmen was still trying to reframe her systematic theft as maternal sacrifice. She showed no remorse, no understanding of the harm she had caused, no acknowledgement that her actions had been wrong. Roberto's statement was different. "I'm sorry for what I did to my sister. I was weak, and I let our mother convince me that stealing from Maria was okay. I know I can never make this right, but I want her to know that I understand why she can't forgive me." His acknowledgement of wrongdoing meant more to me than I'd expected, not because it changed anything, but because it confirmed that at least one member of my family understood the moral weight of what they'd done. Elena maintained her innocence despite overwhelming evidence, claiming she'd only been trying to help Carmen navigate the confusing military benefits system. The sentences reflected the severity of the crimes. Carmen received 15 years in federal prison. Roberto received 8 years. Elena received 5 years. Hayes received 25 years for organizing the entire criminal enterprise. James Mitchell's civil case proceeded simultaneously, resulting in full restitution of the stolen money plus punitive damages totaling over $200,000. The house sale was legally voided, though I chose to sell the property myself rather than return to a place with such painful associations. "You're financially secure now," Mitchell told me as we reviewed the settlement paperwork. "More than that, you've helped establish legal precedents that will protect other military families from similar exploitation." Captain Walsh's follow-up investigation revealed that Hayes's criminal network had targeted 43 military families over 3 years, stealing over $2.1 million. My willingness to testify publicly had enabled prosecutions that protected hundreds of potential future victims. "Staff Sergeant Santos," she said during our final meeting, "your case has resulted in new federal legislation requiring additional safeguards for military family financial arrangements. Your courage in speaking out has literally changed the law." The promotion ceremony came 6 months after the trials concluded. Lieutenant Colonel Webb presented me with my new Sergeant First Class stripes in a ceremony attended by Tank, Isabella, Dr. Kim, Captain Walsh, and James Mitchell, my chosen family. The people who'd stood by me when my biological family had abandoned me. Sergeant Santos has demonstrated that true strength isn't just about surviving trauma. It's about using that survival to protect others and serve something larger than yourself, Lieutenant Colonel Webb said during the ceremony. In the months that followed, I developed a new routine, continuing my military career while volunteering with the Military Family Financial Protection Program that Captain Walsh had created, living independently but maintaining strong connections with the support network that had saved me. Regular therapy sessions with Dr. Kim that focused on building healthy relationships rather than just processing trauma. Isabella became the grandmother I'd never had, attending every military event and holiday celebration with the pride of someone who'd earned her place in my life through loyalty and love rather than biological accident. Tank remained my closest military family, the brother who taught me that real family members show up when things get difficult, rather than running away or exploiting vulnerability. Dr. Kim helped me understand that healing from family betrayal was different from healing from combat trauma, but both required the same fundamental process: learning to trust carefully chosen people while maintaining healthy boundaries with those who'd proven untrustworthy. Carmen wrote letters from prison, manipulation disguised as maternal concern, attempts to guilt me into visiting or providing financial support. I read the first few to understand their content, then instructed the prison to block further correspondence. Roberto's letters were different: genuine remorse and acknowledgement of the harm he had caused. I read them, but didn't respond. Forgiveness might be possible someday, but rebuilding trust wasn't. The final letter came from Elena, still maintaining her innocence, and claiming that I destroyed the family over a misunderstanding about money. I threw it away without finishing it.
6 months after the sentencing, I received word that Carmen had been caught attempting to run a similar scam from prison, targeting the families of fellow inmates. Some people never change, but I had changed. The woman who'd bought a house for her family out of love and loyalty had been replaced by someone who understood that real family is earned through actions, not inherited through genetics. Someone who knew that protecting other military families was more important than maintaining relationships with people who'd proven themselves unworthy of trust. Standing in Isabella's garden on the anniversary of discovering my family's betrayal, I realized that losing them had been the best thing that ever happened to me. It had forced me to find my real family, the people who shared my values, who honored my service, and who would stand by me when everything fell apart. True family, I'd learned, isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, honor, and the willingness to show up when someone needs you most. By that definition, I was surrounded by family every day. 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in San Antonio, addressing the first annual Military Family Financial Protection Conference. The same city where I'd once sat homeless on a curb now hosted an event I'd helped create to protect other service members from experiencing similar betrayal. "My name is Sergeant First Class Maria Santos," I began, my voice steady and confident. 2 years ago, I came home from combat deployment to discover my family had stolen over $68,000 from my military accounts while I was unconscious in a hospital bed recovering from an IED attack that killed 2 of my soldiers. In the front row sat Isabella, now 80 years old, but still my fiercest supporter, wearing the small military family pin I'd given her last Veterans Day. Tank had driven down from Fort Hood, his dress uniform pressed to perfection, carrying the pride of someone who'd watched a broken soldier rebuild herself into an advocate. Dr. Kim had flown in from Walter Reed, representing the mental health professionals who understood that healing from family trauma required different strategies than healing from combat trauma. Major Walsh, promoted after the legislation passed, sat beside them, embodying the institutional changes our case had created. The people who raised me taught me that family was everything, I continued, scanning the audience of worried young soldiers, seasoned veterans, and family members genuinely wanting to support rather than exploit their service members. They were right about that. They just didn't understand what family actually means. I paused, remembering that devastating phone call with Carmen, her casual dismissal of my sacrifice, the hollow feeling of discovering that the people I'd trusted most had systematically robbed me while I fought for my life overseas. Real family doesn't abandon you when you're vulnerable. Real family doesn't steal from you when you're down. Real family doesn't use your service and sacrifice as an opportunity for personal gain. Real family shows up when everything falls apart and fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. Real family is earned through loyalty and demonstrated through actions, not inherited through genetics. During the lunch break, a young airman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Sergeant Santos, my mother's been asking for access to my accounts before my deployment next month. After hearing your story, I think I need to establish better boundaries." "Trust your instincts," I told her, remembering my own naive generosity. Loving family members don't pressure you for financial access. They support your independence and respect your boundaries. If someone gets angry when you protect yourself, that tells you everything you need to know about their motives. The afternoon sessions covered practical protections, limited power of attorney documents, financial monitoring services, and legal resources for military families. I watched attendees taking careful notes, knowing that each piece of information might prevent another service member from experiencing the devastation I'd endured. That evening, at Isabella's house, surrounded by people who'd chosen to love me unconditionally, I reflected on the complete transformation of my life. The investigation following my case had protected over 40 military families and resulted in federal legislation strengthening safeguards for deployed service members. Master Sergeant Hayes and his criminal network were serving decades in federal prison. Carmen, Roberto, and Elena had faced consequences that matched their crimes. I'd received a text from Roberto that afternoon.